I stood in the kitchen of the house my wife and I had bought together, watching my mother-in-law, Patricia, set down her designer handbag on our marble countertop with the kind of deliberateness that suggested she owned the place. She didn't, but that had never stopped her before. "We need to talk about you," Patricia said, not bothering with pleasantries. She was 68, impeccably dressed, with the kind of certainty that only comes from inheriting wealth and never questioning a single decision you've made in your life. "My name is Michael Chen. I'm 42 years old, and I've been married to Patricia's daughter, Sarah, for 8 years. I'm an accountant, not the flashy kind, but the kind who understands numbers deeply, the kind who keeps things running. The kind who had been financially supporting Sarah's entire family for the past 3 years, without complaint, because that's what I do. I provide, I stabilize, I stay quiet." Patricia pulled out a chair at our dining table as if she'd been invited, as if this was her decision to make. "Sarah deserves better," she continued. "A man who can provide real stability, a man with vision. You're competent, Michael, but competent isn't enough. I'm giving you 1 week to prove you can be the kind of husband my daughter needs. Show me something, anything, a business plan, a promotion, a side venture, something that demonstrates you're not just treading water." Sarah stood behind her mother, arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. We'd had this conversation before, between the two of us, I mean. Patricia had this conversation with me for the first time, but Sarah and I had discussed her mother's dissatisfaction many times. It always ended the same way, with me reassuring Sarah, with me apologizing for things I hadn't done wrong, with me promising to do better. This time, I said nothing. 7 days, Michael," Patricia said, standing up as if she'd just delivered an ultimatum to a war room instead of to me in my own kitchen. "That's all you get. After that, I'm having a conversation with Sarah about what comes next." She left within the hour. Sarah tried to apologize, to explain that her mother was stressed, that she didn't mean it, that I should ignore her. I nodded. I held Sarah. I said everything she needed to hear, and then I went to my home office, closed the door quietly, and began to make phone calls. But before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this right now and you're invested in stories about quiet people who finally take control of their lives, please hit that like button, and I'd love to hear where you're watching from in the comments. Drop your location or country below. It helps me understand this community better. Now, back to the story. The first call was to my brother David. He's 45, a venture capitalist in Seattle, and for 3 years he'd been asking me if I wanted to talk about a project he'd been developing, a fintech platform designed specifically for independent contractors and gig workers. He'd mentioned it casually over Thanksgiving, and I dismissed it as too risky, too demanding of my time, too much like asking for trouble. "If you're calling about this," David said, picking up before I could even say hello, "the answer is yes. Always has been yes. I've been waiting for you." "I'm listening," I said. What David explained to me was this. He'd built a prototype for a platform called WorkTrail, designed to help gig workers manage taxes, track income, and access affordable healthcare options. It was brilliant, honestly. It solved a real problem, and he'd been waiting for someone he trusted, someone who understood both technology and finance with the kind of detail that mattered, to help him scale it. He'd asked me 3 times over the past 2 years. 3 times I'd said no, that I couldn't leave my job, couldn't take the risk, couldn't be that person. All true, all necessary, all utterly beside the point now. "I'm in," I said, "but I need to move fast. How long would it take to get something on paper? Something real?" "I have everything ready," David said. There was no surprise in his voice. "I've been holding the door open. I just needed you to walk through it." The second call was to James Romano, a partner at Merton & Associates, the law firm where I'd done freelance accounting work for 15 years. James and I had coffee occasionally. He knew my work was meticulous, that I didn't miss details, that I understood both the financial and legal implications of business structures in a way most people didn't. I need to restructure something, I told him. Something that needs to look legitimate but move quickly. How soon can we meet? For you? Tomorrow morning. What's happening? Nothing dramatic, just reclaiming a few things. The third call was to Thomas Way, a former colleague at the accounting firm where I'd worked before striking out as an independent contractor. Thomas was now a partner at Chen, Valdez and Associates, the firm that had become one of the region's most respected mid-size operations. He'd been trying to recruit me back for 2 years, not aggressively, but consistently. Lunch invitations. We have your old office waiting, that kind of thing. Tom, I said, remember when you said you wanted me to come back? Michael, of course I remember. Are you serious? I need a vice president of operations title. I need it to start immediately, even if I'm not physically in the office 5 days a week. I need the salary to be 6 figures, and I need you to make an announcement about it this week. There was a pause. A real one. I could hear him thinking, calculating, wondering what had changed. This is sudden, he said finally. Yes. Does this have to do with why I haven't seen you at our golf tournament this year? Is everything okay with Sarah? Everything's fine with Sarah, but things are about to become clearer about who I am. Tom didn't ask for more explanation. He'd known me long enough to understand that when I made a decision, it was already made. I'll draw up the paperwork tonight. You can officially start Monday. I need the announcement today, Tom. Press release, email to all staff, everything. That's going to raise questions. Let it. By Wednesday, 3 days into my 7-day reprieve from Patricia, I had a formal position as Vice President of Operations at Chen, Valdez and Associates, announced publicly, a formal business partnership agreement with my brother David, outlining my 40% stake in WorkTrail, filed with the state, a consultation scheduled with 2 venture capital firms that Tom had personally connected me with, both interested in hearing about WorkTrail's potential, a comprehensive business plan developed by David and myself, detailing a 5-year growth strategy that projected WorkTrail would be worth $50 million within 3 years if we executed properly. I didn't tell Sarah any of this. Not yet. That was strategic. That was intentional. What I did tell her was that I had some things in motion, that I was taking her mother's ultimatum seriously, and that she should know more by the weekend. Sarah seemed relieved. She thought I was trying to prove myself to Patricia. In a way, I was, but not in the way any of them expected. On Thursday, Patricia called. Not Sarah, Patricia. I'm checking in, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who's used to people bending to her will. Have you made progress? Yes, I said simply. What kind of progress? The kind that will be public very soon. You can read about it like everyone else. There was a long pause. Patricia didn't like not being informed. She liked control. She liked knowing things before other people knew them. Michael, that's not very helpful. I'm trying to... I know what you're trying to do, I said, and my voice was calm, which somehow made it more cutting than if I'd been angry. But I've decided I don't need your approval anymore. I never needed it, actually. I just thought I did. I hung up. Sarah called 30 seconds later, her voice panicked. What did you say to my mother? The truth, I said. Or at least the beginning of it. On Friday, Tom made the official announcement through multiple channels. The press release went out at 9 a.m. Michael Chen, highly respected independent accountant with 15 years of experience in the field, has joined Chen, Valdez and Associates as Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. The announcement included my photo, a brief bio, and a quote from Tom about his excitement to have me back in a leadership capacity. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it was public. By noon, 3 separate finance journalists had reached out asking about my transition and whether it was connected to David's work trail project, which David had casually mentioned in an interview 2 months ago. By 2 p.m., the venture capital interest had escalated significantly. By 4 p.m., Sarah had seen the announcement and called me at work. "Michael, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to be sure it was real before I did." "This is real?" "Very real. I've been preparing this for 3 years without knowing I was preparing for it. I just didn't have permission from the right person." "Permission? From who?" "From myself." Sarah was quiet on the line. I could hear her thinking, reassessing, understanding something she hadn't understood before. "Does my mother know?" "She will soon. Everyone will." On Saturday morning, I asked Patricia to meet me. Not at her house, not at our house, but at a coffee shop equidistant from both. Neutral territory. She arrived irritated, clearly expecting to be annoyed by whatever explanation I was about to offer. I placed 3 documents on the table in front of her. The first was the press release announcing my position at Chen Valdez and Associates. The second was the formal business partnership agreement between myself and David, showing my 40% equity stake in WorkTrail. The third was a preliminary valuation report from one of the venture capital firms, projecting the company's potential market value based on our growth model. Patricia read them in silence. Her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to something that looked like respect, though she'd never used that word out loud. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked finally. 3 years. Unconsciously for the first 2. Consciously for the last one. Does Sarah know? She does now. You will too if you read the news over the next few days. Patricia set the documents down carefully. "This doesn't change anything about what I said on Monday. You still needed—" "I know what I needed," I interrupted, and I said it gently but with absolute clarity. "And I've given it to myself. Your approval or your disapproval is no longer the metric I'm using to measure my life." She didn't respond immediately. When she did, it was quietly. "Sarah loves you. I know, and I love her, but I've been loving her in a way that kept me small. That's changing." I stood up, left $40 on the table for 2 untouched coffees, and walked out. The following week, WorkTrail was featured in TechCrunch. The article focused on the innovative approach to gig worker benefits, but it also highlighted the partnership between David Chen and his brother Michael, described as an accountant with a unique understanding of financial infrastructure and human needs. Patricia called Sarah. Sarah told me Patricia said, "He's going to be fine." Not, "I'm sorry for underestimating him." Not, "I was wrong." Just, "He's going to be fine." It was probably the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. I decided that was enough. 6 months later, WorkTrail had secured $2.8 million in seed funding from 2 venture capital firms. 6 months after that, $8 million in Series A. By month 15, we were being discussed as one of the most innovative fintech solutions in the gig economy space. I was 43 years old, and I'd become a co-founder of a company that was changing how millions of independent workers managed their financial lives. I kept my position at Chen, Valdez and Associates, working 3 days a week in the office and 2 days remotely building WorkTrail. The salary I made from the law firm alone was more than I'd made in my entire freelance career. The equity stake in WorkTrail was worth considerably more and growing, but the real money wasn't the point. The point was something else entirely. The point was that Patricia's ultimatum, that cruel, dismissive challenge, had forced me to ask a question I'd been avoiding for years. What was I actually afraid of? Not financial instability, not failure exactly. I was afraid of being seen as selfish for wanting more, afraid that ambition was an unfaithful thing, afraid that Sarah would resent me for needing my own identity separate from being the stable husband, the supportive presence, the man who sorted everything out so everyone else could be comfortable. What I discovered once I finally did it was that Sarah didn't resent me. She admired me. More than that, she felt permission to want things for herself too. She went back to graduate school. She started a therapy practice specializing in family dynamics. She stopped apologizing for her mother's behavior and started setting boundaries instead. Patricia, for her part, eventually came around. When Work Trail was valued at $50 million, exactly the 3-year projection David and I had made, she attended the celebration dinner and she told people I was her son-in-law, who built something remarkable. Not an apology, but a kind of recognition. What I realized, looking back at that week when Patricia gave me 7 days to prove myself, was that she'd actually given me something valuable, though not what she intended. She'd given me permission to be angry, permission to refuse to shrink, permission to understand that the people who love you aren't always the people whose approval you need to seek. I spent 6 days making phone calls instead of 1 week, trying to convince Patricia of something she'd never believed about me anyway. I didn't do it to prove her wrong, though that was a nice side effect. I did it because her ultimatum forced me to admit that I'd been waiting for someone else to tell me I was allowed to want more. Once I understood that, once I stopped asking for permission, everything else became inevitable. The moral of this story isn't that you should blow up your life the moment someone doubts you. It's that sometimes the people who matter most to us are the ones who will challenge us most fiercely, not to hurt us, but because they believe we're capable of more than we've shown them. And sometimes the best response to that challenge isn't to prove them right. It's to prove yourself right. If you've watched this far and there's someone in your life whose approval you've been seeking when you should have been seeking your own, please drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story, because I guarantee you're not the only one who's been waiting for permission to become who you actually are. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Because these stories, the ones about quiet people who finally speak up, they matter. They remind us that our silence isn't protection. It's just delay. I'll see you in the next one.